Welcome to some new r/malicious compliance stories, where people comply to the letter, but not the spirit of a request. I hope you had a great day. The first story is called No More Overtime. I was offered a bad salary and promotion to a job I was already doing, through increased responsibility by being a good employee with great job performance. I turned it down. I wasn't allowed to negotiate either, which I still did. Screw that rule. The counteroffer was still far less than median, which was the lowest I would go, as I did a good job. It doesn't look good when employees refuse promotions and nearly every manager in the company knows me. I'm the supply guy after all. So they tried taking my overtime away. They had to be gunning after my pride and performance and not wanting to be fired. To note, I live a simple life and don't care for the money. But my friends in the company are in similar positions and have families and need the money. I can get another job easy enough that pays enough for me to live off of. I turned it down because it is not a lot of money to a big company and I don't want to fuel the mistreatment of its employees, my friends. I complied with no more overtime, but I told them I needed the overtime to do a good job. As a supply guy for a large company, I order millions of dollars of supplies throughout the year. I didn't have time to negotiate big orders anymore. HR didn't care and my direct boss didn't think I'd let my job performance drop. I started doing the bare minimum within my HR provided copy and paste job description in only 8-hour days. My performance sucked. I did the roll up of my job title to begin with, but they would never acknowledge this or they'd have to pay me for it. So now I was spending over $20,000 more a month than I used to. The boss knew, but what could he do? He messed up. I'm the only person in the company with the knowledge that can only be gained through experience in doing the job. I am also critical to many operations. These are small figures to a large company, and it's not like my boss and HR would tell people they messed up in my handling. He also spent the personnel budget on hiring his friend to be a director, so I heard later. So I stuck around until I had trained a replacement, since I didn't want to leave on a bad note, since the great friends I made in the company are the managers I worked with daily for years. So then I left. It would be a bad story if this was all. When I left, a lot of people were curious why. My friends, near every manager, weren't afraid to talk, as my boss wasn't their boss. Without going into detail, I'm popular in my company for lower level workers. I've saved the day a few times and do all I can do to make their jobs easier. Due to other complaints with HR and poor pay, my leaving fueled their discontent further to a noticeable performance level. This prompted an unofficial investigation by other directors. Our COO was the likely core of the problem. He hired my boss, his friend, and had a say in the HR director's hiring. Other directors soon drove them out, as it's hard to like a job when your employees and co-workers hate you. The HR director still works there and causes problems, but she no longer has a say in pay levels. A few managers and good employees got raises. There's still a lack of base pay though, if you ask me. Overall, I like to think I had a key role to play as I knew a few directors on a personal level. I'm back at college after dropping out the first time for medical reasons and still talk to my friends at the company regularly. The next story is called She Knew She Messed Up. When I was in the army, my unit had a training day one day where we did tactical movements and close quarter combats with paintball guns. It was pretty fun. Except it was in Texas in the middle of summer in a training area full of tall grass that I ended up crawling around in a lot. I didn't notice any problems until a couple of hours later when I was getting ready to head home and my legs started burning. I pulled my boots off and rolled my pants up, and my feet and legs up to my mid-thigh were swollen and covered in hundreds of angry red welts. Apparently I'd crawled through a nest of chiggers. They are tiny biting bugs common in America that are apparently called Trombiculidae officially. They'd gone to town on my legs, bad enough to provoke an allergic reaction. I drive myself to the emergency room at the base hospital, and while I'm waiting to be seen and feeling more and more terrible, but needing to focus on something else, I started counting the bites. I stopped when I got to 100, and that was just on the inside of my right calf. The dog had never seen anything like it. I ended up getting a massive dose of steroids, antibiotics and inflammatories, all hospital grade and with serious side effects of their own. I also got 4 days of quarters, the military equivalent of being told to stay home and don't come into work. My girlfriend came and picked me up from the hospital and drove me home, because at that point I was in no state to drive myself between the allergic reaction and the meds I was on to treat it. On the way home I call my sergeant to let him know about my situation so he can get word up the chain of command. About an hour after that, I get a call from the first sergeant, the senior-most NCO in the unit herself. Now, she was one of the most incompetent first sergeants I've ever worked with during my time in the army. Constantly making terrible decisions, mindlessly greenlighting whatever terrible decision our equally incompetent captain came up with, and micromanaging people unnecessarily. She tells me that my quarters had been revoked by the captain and that I have to come in the following day. I tell her that I'm holding orders in my hand from a doctor who's also a lieutenant colonel that I'm supposed to take time off to recover. She responds with, "You can get quarters from bug bites," and rants at me that I'm just malingering and trying to get out of work. There was no way I could possibly be seriously ill from just some bug bites. I tried to explain that I'd had an allergic reaction, but she wasn't having it, insisting I was a liar and a bad soldier because of it. I was to be at formation the next morning at 0900. Because of the extensive exercise we all got at the training event, they'd cancelled PT for the day, with my supposed quarter slip. They would decide then if they were going to punish me for trying to pull this stunt. Cue malicious compliance. Okay, I wore my PT uniform, a t-shirt and shorts, rather than our fatigues the next day, and had my girlfriend drive me in. I was still too messed up from the bites and meds to drive. I figured if I was going to get in trouble anyways, being in the wrong uniform would be the least of my worries. But my bare legs instead showed off the literal hundreds of now angrily red, almost purple or black in some cases, huge welts on my legs. The skin was more wet than not by the next morning. And I rocked up, showing off that rather horrific side to my entire company of more than 100 enlisted, NCOs and officers. Literally everyone who sees me is like, "What the heck happened to your legs?" It's clear to every single person in the company that I'm actually legitimately having an allergic reaction just by sight alone. The first sergeant hears people making a ruckus, sees me and turns bright red. She knows she messed up big time. She hears me answering the warrant officers, including my direct supervisor, asking, "Why are you here if you are that sick?" with, "First sergeant made me come in and told me that you can't get quarters because of bug bites." Within 10 minutes I've handed in a copy of my quarter slip, gotten a quiet and very private apology from the first sergeant and was sent home for the next 4 days. The third story is called Frosty Says Hello. This is my second winter in my house. Last year I went pretty low-key because we were still moving in and didn't have any landscaping done. This year the kids begged me to put up Frosty, and because I didn't have any excuses this time I set it up. Now for some background about Frosty, our property and the neighbor. Frosty is one of those 10+ feet tall inflatables you get from Canadian Tire or Walmart. He's a bit much to be honest, but makes the 3 kids happy, so it is what it is. It's also probably his last year in service, because he's a bit threadbare this year. I live in the burbs, where the homes are honestly too close together, 3 to 4 feet apart. But we didn't have a lot of choice in the matter when we bought it. On one side my property ends right at the edge of the house, and on the other side of the property butts up against the neighbor's house. How this works out is there's a 3 to 4 feet gap between driveways on one side, and a 6 to 8 feet gap between driveways on the other side. I placed Frosty on the larger of the 2 gaps, more on my side of the front yard, but over the property line a little. It was mostly 2 guide wires to make sure Frosty doesn't blow away. To be perfectly clear, when he deflated, I made sure he wouldn't touch the neighbor's driveway, walkway or vehicles. I thought I gave him absolutely nothing to complain about. Now my neighbor is mostly a nice guy, definitely could be worse, but is a bit high-strung. Did his yard landscaping like what you would find on Pinterest. Mows his yard in diagonal pattern so it's almost like a piece of art. My wife once said to me he would fit in perfectly in a stereotypical HOA. He doesn't do Halloween, doesn't set up outside Christmas decorations, steers clear of all of that. A bit stiff, but overall still a nice guy. So I set up Frosty last weekend and didn't turn on the timer until about 2 days ago, because we were getting a lot of snow and I didn't want him get buried. Yesterday the neighbor comes over to politely complain about Frosty. It's technically on his yard, he's worried it's going to damage the yard, doesn't want to be that guy but needs me to move it. We talk a bit and I try to get him to relax on this. It makes my kids really happy. There's not enough room on the other side of the driveway. It's very firmly secured and difficult to remove, etc. But no deal. He wants it moved. He also doesn't say it, but based on the way he's talking and previous conversations with him, he thinks it's tacky. So I agree. You are technically correct. I'll move it to the backyard. So it's now set up in the backyard, in plain sight of his rear window, looking over the fence. I even angled it a bit so it's looking right at his house instead of mine. If he looks into the backyard, Frosty is waving. Having dinner? Frosty says hello. And he won't have a thing to complain about because it won't be touching the fence or anything else on his property. The next story is called Petty Compliance. I live in France, but I come from another European country. One of my flatmates, let's call him Pierre, can be hard to deal with. He spent around 1 year abroad working, and thus he considers his English skills nearly impeccable. To be fair, his English is okay, but far from flawless. In addition to this, one of his worst traits is that sometimes he seems to have an urge to correct any teeny tiny imperfection in your statements. I guess he just wants to show you that you are wrong and he knows better. An example? New Zealand is on the opposite side of the world. Well, technically on the other side of the world there's water. New Zealand is on the opposite side from Spain, not France. One specific episode leading to the malicious compliance left me with a bad taste in my mouth. I was going to do a very simple hike with some friends and he stopped me while I was putting my running shoes on, almost ready to exit. Oh hello, where are you going? I'm doing an easy hike nearby with some friends. Wanna join? Nah, I don't have my running shoes, I will buy some and join you next week. Ah, okay, but be careful, because next week we are planning to go hiking in the Alps. You might want to consider buying trekking shoes, not running ones. Well, the Alps where? You know, they extend from southern France to Austria. He had a grin on his face as to say, I gotcha. His response got me in the wrong way and I rudely yelled back something in the likes of, oh come on, you know what I mean. It must be noted that we live approximately 1 hour away from the Alps. And while yes, the Alps are huge and range from France to Slovenia, his remark was undoubtedly unnecessary. I exited the flat halving and went looking for my car. On the way there, I thought that maybe I was too harsh with him. I texted him. In English, since in the conversation above he addressed me using it rather than French. My message was, hey, sorry for my reaction before. I did not like your comment, but I should have responded more calmly. He answered back with, haha, it's okay bro, just remember that I'm an accountant and you must be precise with me. Unfortunately, I'm a little touchy and him not apologizing at all made me go bitter mode. A few days later, I was still salty and I received a message from Pierre in English. The message said, hi, can you put a beer on the fridge for tonight? I read it once again and a voice in my head whispered part of the message he sent me a few days before. You must be precise with me. So I grabbed a bottle of his beers and placed it on top of our fridge. He must have had forgotten his request because he did not ask me about the beer. A few months later the bottle was still up there, visible only by climbing on a chair. At least I had a good laugh showing it to every friend coming to visit me. The fifth story is called Just Following the Law. Omani nationals have major labor law protections, particularly if they work in oil and gas, one of the major industries there. I was posted to Oman for a project and discovered that a very small number of the locals use this protection for their own benefit. They basically slack off, claim they need to go to funerals for endless aunts, claims the wadi is flooded and basically avoid work. Because of the labor law, you can fire them without a court case on your hands, and foreign companies don't want to go in front of an Omani magistrate. It was common for fired Omani nationals to be paid out years of severance as a penalty to their bad foreign bosses. If they resigned, this was not the case. When I got to Muscat, I discovered we had inherited one of these clowns. He was doing it all and unfortunately was also technically incompetent. I spoke to HR and they said we can't do anything. I asked for a copy of the HR law for Oman and read it. I then spoke to the chap in question and discovered he was interested in training and traveling to the USA to our headquarters. Now, one thing. No one there liked field work. They avoided it like the plague. But this chap agreed he would do field work first if he could go to the States after. HR witnessed this. Two things then happened. Under Oman law, we were allowed to assign field techs to the field only on an equal time basis. This means for every day in the field, 1 day in the office. But there was curiously no upper limit in the law as to how long you could send someone for a continuous period, provided it was in equal time within the year. HR said, oh, it's customary no more than 2 weeks. I asked if this was in his contract and they said no. I then said, okay, I'm assigning this chap to 180 days in the field, so we can then send him to the USA for 180 days. HR looked at me as though I was mad. But I insisted it was legal. They double checked and said, okay, seems legal. I told the chap the next day he came in, "Since you agreed to go to the USA, we are sending you for 6 months. However, you need to go to the field for 6 months, leaving tomorrow, to a nasty desert camp." He resigned on the spot. HR came in and privately congratulated me. Turned out they'd been trying to get rid of this chap for 5 years. The last story is called "Nobody Wanted Her There." This happened to a friend at his company, and I thought it was hilarious. The main characters are my friend Patrick, male, then 26, Ellie, female, then around 29, and Boss, an older man. Patrick and Ellie worked at the same company, in the same division, under the boss. Ellie was abusive to all the employees in the division, but especially to Patrick, because he was the newcomer and he was talented, and he didn't suck up to her. Her bullying tactics included, but were not limited to, taking credit for other people's ideas, convincing Patrick that the others in the division didn't like him, attempting to ruin the careers of anyone who didn't suck up to her by preventing them from getting assigned to cool new projects, and, last and worst, trying to get Patrick fired, which she almost succeeded in doing. She was so horrible to Patrick that his mental health suffered from it. Everyone was vaguely aware of her behavior, but she did hit the worst parts, so it was never quite obvious or bad enough to get her fired. Plus, she was also popular with the company's clients, who didn't know, and she was a favorite of one of the top people at the company. Ellie seemed untouchable, until several months after the Patrick almost gets fired incident. The company started having a conversation about moving some of its employees to contract positions. Becoming a contractor would have its pros and cons. Contractors would pay their own health insurance and would have no job security, being hired for individual contracts rather than a permanent employment position. But they would also be allowed to work for other companies. It was a great move for someone who was well known and wanted more visibility and options, but a lousy move for someone lower on the totem pole. Ellie, who was somewhat of a narcissist who believed she was destined for greatness, waltzed into Boss's office and told him she wanted to switch to a contractor position. She believed the company couldn't get by without her and would continue hiring her, while she also got to work for other companies and gained fame and visibility within the industry. Boss was all smiles and pretended to be supportive of her. This is a great career move. Think of all the options you'll have. As soon as the paperwork was signed, he never hired her for a single contract, and her future with the company, the best one in the city for this particular industry, was ruined. Ellie eventually found employment elsewhere, but it wasn't as good as the position she'd left. Patrick found out the second part of the story years later. He was under the impression, because of what Ellie had said and how people avoided him because they knew Ellie didn't like him, that no one was on his side and that his co-workers and boss had actually liked her. They hadn't. Turns out Boss felt his hands were tied because she was a favorite of one of the top people at the company. But as soon as she gave him an out that allowed him to never have to work with her again, he took it. And with that, we end today's video. Let me know what you think about the stories. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate the stories and today's video? I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. And I hope you have a great day. Stay safe. Bye bye.